Well, the House versus the NCAA is supposedly getting ready to draw towards a conclusion that, Garrett, it would mean we're going to have a revenue sharing model, a win for the players who, according to a couple of lawsuits from 2016, 2017, say that, hey, we're not getting the fair enough share of what we're generating for y'all. Fair point. But the results are maybe some detrimental, or at least sweeping changes to the college landscape that we're going to have to witness here probably in the next 2 years or so. Some people are really going to benefit from this, and other people are really going to be hurt from this. Start with this before I kind of summarize everything. When you hear revenue sharing in college sports, what does that mean to you? What do you think of?
Look, when I'm just thinking revenue sharing at first, I'm thinking that this is just going to disproportionately kind of hurt the small guy. And, it's not going to be the big football programs that struggle with this because, if you have the money to spend, you can spend it. And if you can kind of grab that and leverage that, that's going to be good. But man, like, I was even thinking, last night when we were, kind of celebrating some women's tennis and
Yeah.
watching that whole feed. It was a rough feed to watch. Like it wasn't a great, camera angle. It wasn't an awesome venue necessarily, but that's just kind of what they're working with, right? That's a lot of college athletics, even at the D1 level. You're just not going to be working with a whole lot, right? There's, a lot of these like smaller scale, sports that they're just not working with a bunch. And so they're going to do the best that they can. And, shout out that ESPN has the infrastructure to broadcast any of it, or else we just have to hear about it the next day. But, it's stuff like this that gets me worried about those types of things in the future. We're a college football podcast. I don't know that it has the biggest effect on college football, but you're going to see it trickle down into everything else we love about college athletics. And, that's really where I think the rub is there. I think that's where we're going to see the bigger issues.
I think there are so many trickle downs that, I mean, heck, it's just kind of the name of the game, right? Like since
Hmm.
NIL, it feels like we're having consequences every single day. We're having to
Yeah.
adjust on the fly, right? So basically, the summary looks like this, and I tweeted out. So Pete Thamel put together a lengthy article on this, and I've tweeted it out. So at 3Tech Pod, go find that. You can read it in its entirety. I also tweeted out that link with the GIF of Michael saying, "Explain this to me like I'm 5." So I'm gonna try and summarize it for you.
I definitely need that because this, my casual read through the day to day had me a little bit head spinning going, huh? What does that mean? Huh?
It was a
Did I read that right?
long, yeah,
Yeah.
legal jargon
It was very
filled
good, just not good for
article.
split attention.
So basically, what it looks like is this: the NCAA is being sued by a lot of different people over revenue sharing. Right? Athletes saying we're not getting a fair enough cut of what we are producing, what we're worth for you, and that is true. Right? That's what started this whole NIL debate in the first place. So essentially, what the reported framework looks like is that the each university would have $20 million ish to spend on players every single year. And this is not per sport, this is department wide. So that means a couple of different things. One, that we would probably be eliminating scholarship limits. It's essentially on the teams to divide that money as they see fit. So if you need, $2 million to pay a quarterback, then you only have $18 million to compensate the rest of your athletic program. So with Title IX, you got to be fair with everything. They would have to do some, arithmetic, right, to balance out the rest or distribute the rest of that money. Um, so scholarship limits, probably a thing of the past. In baseball, right now, it's 11.7 is the famous scholarship limit, which
Yeah.
makes no sense. So now, if you wanted 20 scholarships for baseball, hey, go for it. That's part of your cash, right? It also likely gets rid of collectives. If we're under a revenue sharing model where each team has roughly the same amount of money to spend on their players, then collectives kind of lose their purpose, right? This whole pay for
Mhm.
play model that collectives are hiding under the guise of just providing financial opportunity to their athletes with, they're suddenly useless. Like if giving all of this money doesn't really matter, or doesn't really benefit some of these big boosters, or just regular community members, then the business of collectives, which is already on shaky ground as it is, and I promise you that from real life experience, that's going to dry up. The downside to that is walk-ons are also likely going to be a thing of the past, right? Now, if you're
Mhm.
building the best possible roster with X amount of money, a salary cap essentially, um, you're not the well for walk-ons, I think, at least that's what most people are saying, is largely going to dry up. If you
Yeah.
don't have a scholarship limit that then you backfill every other spot with a walk-on, then probably every player is going to be compensated in some form or fashion, thus not making them a walk on. Now, what does the NCAA get out of this? Well, the NCAA basically gets to stop getting sued. They have been sued left, right, and center over the last couple of years, and they keep losing. Their track record in court is abysmal because, let's face it, the NCAA is useless. There's no leadership at the top. Charlie Baker stepped in, probably a little too late, and has tried to correct the ship with honestly a lot of very strict policies. But at this point, the NCAA has just been making things up as they go, and when someone calls their bluff, well, they lose in court. So what they would be doing is, if everyone has to opt in to this settlement to benefit from the revenue sharing, one of the rights that they would forfeit is the ability to file a class action lawsuit like these lawsuits that came about in 2016 and 2017. So basically, you can't file a lawsuit on behalf of we the people. You can still sue the NCAA, but it would have to be an individual suit against the organization, which basically what Pete Thamel was saying is the NCAA would make it so expensive that only the bravest and richest athletes would ever dream of doing that, right? So it's legal protection there. Now, with all of that in place, have I lost you, or are you keeping up with me so far?
So, okay, I want to make sure that I'm hearing everything correctly. So, is this just the NCAA redistributing 20 mil per year to a team, or is this like you get to do 20 mil a year and that's like a cap?
So I don't there's not an exact answer on that. The
Okay,
the revenue sharing model that's been reported to us, as I read it, is somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million that
right,
the NCAA has to provide to the schools from the revenue that they make.
right.
So it's all of the media rights. It's a redistribution of that, and every school gets a
Mhm.
piece of the pie.
But that
Now,
that would go equally to like the Texas Longhorns and then like, Akron or Miami, Ohio or someone like that, right? Like, is
so
that
I don't that's what I don't know. Is I don't
yeah,
know if it's like, it wouldn't make sense for
right.
Texas and Akron or Texas and Central Arkansas to get the
Mhm.
same sliver of pie. Where so I that needs more clarification. I'm sure
Right.
we'll get more details on that as we go along.
Yeah.
If by the time you're listening to this, or maybe you're listening to this as it comes out and you're like, wait, no, I have an answer, tweet us right in. I'd love to talk with you about that. But as I
Yeah.
read it, right now the proposal is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20-ish million dollars. Now, as I mentioned, that's coming from the NCAA as a part of this
Mhm.
settlement. They are the ones that take all of the pie from the media revenue and then would redistribute it, right? That's how revenue sharing works.
Mhm.
But in order to pay for this, here's the rub. Here's where there is no free
Mhm.
lunch. The NCAA plans on withholding a chunk of postseason revenue from every conference in order to pay for this. Now, what does that look like? Well, it's different for every conference. In the current proposal, you would assume that the Power Four would foot the biggest bill, right? They're the biggest,
Right.
richest schools, right? Wrong. In the current proposal, the Power Four conferences are only paying 40% of the bill, while all the other conferences, all the smaller schools, all the cash strapped institutions that exists out there in the United States, they are picking up 60% of the tab. The Big East, for example, a basketball laden conference, that's where they make all of their revenue.
Right.
They're considering action against the NCAA and trying to write all of these letters because they are going to cripple the Big East by taking somewhere of $6 million a year away from that conference. That is a massive piece of the financial pie for the Big East. Some of these conferences are on the hook to lose upwards of 20% of their annual funding just like that. Just
Right.
because the NCAA has now put the burden on the group of 5 and all the other smaller conferences instead of what seems like proportionally doing it by footing the bill with the Power 4 conferences.
Yeah, I've got so many questions and concerns with this. Like it I understand that this is still kind of early stages and maybe this is like a tentative agreement, but there's so many ways that I could see this going so catastrophically wrong that I kind of feel like we're gonna just reset in a year. We're like, hey, guess what? You can't sue us, and like we're gonna sue you because we should be able to sue you. Like that's kind of the first thing that I think is gonna happen is you're gonna get some of these institutions actually suing over being able to sue or something like that. So that's kind of the first thing. So couple of things that I'm immediately thinking with all of this. Number one, if that 20 million a year is just going to be a redistributed thing that goes into everyone's pockets who opts in, but they're not going to put any sort of cap on what you're allowed to spend total, then that's a problem, right? Because it's just giving more people more money. It's basically an inflationary measure for all of college football. Everyone's just going to get a little bit more. That's
Mhm.
kind of the first thing. I like the idea that it makes you think about your scholarships, right? Because now you can't just go pay the big guy and then nobody else, right? That's not how teams work. You have to actually start letting your athletic directors act like they're thinking about a salary cap, but there's so many issues with that too because number one, obviously bigger schools are going to benefit from this because they can just not pay their football players and make like other companies foot the NIL bill, right? You can just say, hey, we're going to pay football a super flat fee and go get your NIL deals, right? And the big stars are going to get their deals anyways, and it's not going to be from a collective, but it'll be from Joe Schmo's restaurant and so's heating and plumbing or whatever from in town, right? And so that's not really going to fix the competitive balance. And in fact, I think it actually benefits the big schools and the big programs even more because they have the ability to outsource some of that NIL to local business. But that's not even really the other big concern. My biggest concern with this is actually what happens when it gets a Title IX suit. Because right now, it has to be an even number of scholarships under Title IX. Does this address that? Does this address NIL funding having to be even? This is a big legal question I think you're going to have to settle is your 20 million going to have to split evenly between the men's and the women's sports or is that
Yeah,
discriminatory to spend maybe 15 million over here because it's your big revenue producers and those are the ones you want to spend on and then
right.
you kick 5 off to women's basketball and volleyball and soccer. Yeah, who cares about the girls, right? That's a weird thing to me where I have a big concern with that too. Also, why would a conference opt into this if you're a small guy? That's like me saying, like, hey, I was walking by the street on Wall Street and those guys just got caught up in a financial scandal. So let me kick in my billions of dollars to help out because I was just there. Like,
Well, so
that doesn't
so the
make sense.
conferences, if this gets settled, the conferences don't have a say. They're in. As members of the
Right.
NCAA, they're stuck. Like the Big East and the CAA were quoted saying, like, we're trying to do everything we can to
Mhm.
stop this, but like our hands are tied. If
Right.
they sign this into law, because it's a legal settlement, right? So from the article, it says, while several important details are not finalized, sources have confirmed the following general structure of an agreement to settle the House versus NCAA case. The NCAA's national office would foot the bill for a $2.7 billion payment for past damages over the course of the next 10 years. The NCAA would generate the majority of that money partially by cutting back on funds it distributes to Division I schools on an annual basis. The power conferences would agree to a forward-looking revenue sharing structure that would give schools the ability to spend a maximum of roughly $20 million per year on direct payments to athletes. The 20 million figure could grow larger every year if school revenue grows. Each school would be left to decide how to allocate that money while remaining
So
compliant with
so it is
Title
a
IX law.
salary cap, basically.
So it does become a salary cap, and as it says, that structure is for the power conferences. So
Right.
that's the answer to that.
Yeah.
Apologize overlooking that, but yeah, it's essentially becomes a salary cap. But because we don't know everything about it, like you said, it's up to the schools to decide how they're going to spend that money. So
Yeah.
what's the standard for Title IX compliance there? I don't know that we have an answer.
Right, because you could be a school that just decides I want to spend 18 million of this on my football program, and I'm gonna kick, one and a half towards basketball, maybe baseball and softball and women's basketball can pick up the rest, but we don't really care about those anyways, right? And you're just a big football school. That doesn't seem like that's gonna go over really well with a lot of people, and that's where I'm starting to see you're not gonna sue the NCAA. You're gonna be able to sue like under Title IX for discrimination on that. And I think that's a big issue that they're not thinking about probably that much right now. I mean, unless we've missed something in the article, which is entirely possible. It's long and dense, so there's a good chance we might have missed something. But like, I don't see how this makes things more competitive because, like, obviously, like, okay, so what I was saying about NIL being outsourced from this, like, this isn't the same as NIL, obviously, but NIL still exists. Like, do you think that like University of Alabama, University, Georgia, or Ohio State or Texas or whoever, like, do you think any of those schools are going to struggle to pay players millions of dollars over that cap if they just ask their buddy over at the other place to do it? And because the NCAA is really, really good about cracking down on that stuff. Historically, they're really good about cracking down on illegal payments to
Right.
players, right? They're going to do a real good job this time around. Trust us, guys. Don't worry, we figured it out now. But here's the issue too. Like, these smaller conferences can't do it, so they won't. Right? Like what you're talking, the Big East can't foot 6 million annually. That's just not feasible for them, and they can't grow with $6 million that they owe to the NCAA just for doing it. And because they can't, they won't. So you're going to see either some massive lawsuit where the Big East leaves the NCAA, and there's some massive rift in like all of college athletics, or the Big East will just stop existing because they can't exist under that model. And
Right.
that's not what we need to fix college football. What we don't need right now is fewer conferences. We don't want to just get to the point where we're saying, well, it's the SEC and the Big Ten, and I guess the Big 12. And if the ACC wants to hold on, I guess, like, then we still got some of those other little ones. And we don't want to do that, right? Like, we enjoy all the different conferences. That's what makes college football so fun and so special, is because those conferences feel like they matter. I know for me personally, as a fan of multiple different sports, I don't care so much about your conference championship games, or oh, if the Cowboys win the NFC championship, like, that's nice, but like, I want to win the Super Bowl, right? If the Mavericks go off and they win the Western Conference, like, that's cool. Go win the finals, like, that's what I want. And that's the big hardware. And I don't want that to be what college football is. I want it to still matter if you win your conference and if you make the playoff, or if you win your bowl game, or if you win the whole thing, right? And obviously the national championship is a thing that everyone aspires to, but there's so many other things that matter to college football right now that we will lose if all these conferences start dissolving because they can't pay. Right? This is just something that they're not going to be able to do. And so, and that's something I mentioned, I think, a couple weeks ago, and we talked about this, first time around with some of these lawsuits, was if they can't do it, they won't. If it can't work, it won't work. And so, because it can't work, it just isn't going to happen. Whether they sign it or not, there has to be some money somewhere for the Big East to pay the NCAA. If they don't have it, they're not going to go, sell
Redo.
stadiums. They're not going to
Yeah.
go do a bake sale or a lemonade stand. That's not going to be how they raise their money. They're just going to not pay them and say, okay, come and take our not money. It's not here.
I think it's dangerous. Obviously, the biggest value is in the power conferences, right? And so that's why they're going to agree to this revenue sharing model.
Hmm.
And it'll probably benefit them in the long run, right? As they
Yeah.
just evolve towards a professional league, a professional sports league, it will benefit them. But for the group of five, in these smaller conferences, like you're saying, I don't know what you do, right? You're going to be penalized with none of the benefit, and penalized and punished for something that, honestly, you're not at the forefront anyway, right? I mean, I don't think an athlete at Central Arkansas or at Eastern Washington is all that concerned about the school holding back, money from
Right.
whatever media that they have. I could be wrong. Maybe that's the case. But when you look at these court cases that are pending, it's all at bigger schools, right? It's
Hmm.
Colorado. that's in the news most recently. So at the end of the day, it's frustrating. I think it's another massive thread that's getting pulled that continues to rip apart the fabric of traditional college sports. It furthers the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and it's all, I think, a result of the iceberg that is the NCAA. I mean,
Right.
college athletics hit the iceberg that was NCAA and
Yeah.
their fraudulent management, for decades, right? And this has just been the slow descent to the bottom of the ocean, unfortunately. And I think this is another step in that direction.
Yeah. Let me try to at least land the plane on a little bit of a positive note, because this has been something I've said consistently since we started the podcast, right? When we were talking about NIL, I said this. When we talked about the transfer portal, I said this. Everything is going to self regulate, right? College football is not going to go away. There's no way that college football just disappears overnight, right?
Right.
The Sun Belt, for example, or the MAC, for example. These may not be traditional conferences that we see long term and all that, but those teams are still going to exist and they're still going to play football, right? Like whether or not they're calling themselves the Sun Belt and the Sun Belt's affiliated with the NCAA and everything else, like Coastal's going to get out there and play football. They're not just going to not play football in a fall. Well, the NCAA said we had to pay them money and we couldn't afford it, so I guess we'll take the fall off. Like they're going to show up and play football, even if it's not sanctioned or not whatever. Like they'll still show up. They'll still schedule the teams that they want to schedule from the same Sun Belt conference, and they'll keep their rivalry games. They'll do the same thing they always have. Maybe it's just a new scrimmage and it doesn't count for NCAA records, but that's not going to matter to the fans, right? The fans aren't going to care if the NCAA counted it. This is the same way that we say, like, who cares if you vacate wins, right? You can vacate as many wins as you want to. We all saw it happen, right? If
Right.
Michigan gets hit for the Connor Stallions thing, who cares? Banners fly forever. Every Michigan fan knows what it felt like to watch, that team win a championship and, Donovan Edwards, doing his thing in that first quarter and everything else. Like they're going to remember what that was. And so I'm not worried about college football, right? I'm worried maybe short term for what it means for money and keeping up and being able to compete and everyone still being in the same thing. But long term, even medium term, like we're still going to play football. Nobody needs to worry about this. At some point, all this is going to even out. It's all going to settle and we're all going to end up being fine. So doom and gloom segment, but let's land the plane a little bit positive. It's going to be fine. We're still going to play football, and that's the part that we care about, anyways.
There you go. All right, let us know what you think about the lawsuit, about the settlement, all things NCAA at 3Tech Pod, Instagram, Twitter, write in 3techpod at gmail.com. On the other side of this final break, we give you more best bets right here on the 3Tech.
Gracious him. How about